Good morning. Can I borrow somebody's tie here to put on? I don't have nowhere to clip this thing. Maybe we'll do it like that. Can you hear me all right in the back? Too loud? All right? All right. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to Rolling Hills Church of Christ. And thank you for being here this morning on a crisp fall morning. And hadn't been too many weeks ago, we come in here and we all had short sleeves on, right? Now today, since the seasons changed, well, we got jackets and sweaters and no tie. But anyways, it is good to be here. I'm thankful for your presence. If you're visiting with us, we're thankful that you're here. And if you're looking for a church home, why, we hope you found it right here at Rolling Hills. All right, we always get updates on sick and bereavements, and so I'll open the floor up to you. And who we need to update on? Yes, do have some sad news there that Miss Ruby Lawrence, she did pass away yesterday afternoon, about 4:30, I believe. And so let's keep her daughter Margie Hall and that family in our prayers. Also, Johnny and Dorothy, we keep you in our prayers as they buried their sister Linda this week. And who else? What else do we need? Yes, ma'am. Vern and Geneva Gibbs. And Vernon is, they're both in their 90s, and Vernon's pretty bad shape. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Who else? You're way over there. Let me come to you. Yes, ma'am. Your brother Kenneth. Okay. His cancer. He got bad reports back from his cancer, right? Okay. All right. Now, where is he at? In Glen, Indiana. Okay. So Miss Nancy's brother. And what was his full name again? Kenneth Ginner. Yes. I want to say Welch, but I knew that wasn't right. All right. Who else? Anything else? Yes, it is. It is. Good to have you back. Good to be back, right? I know when you had that knee, and I had my knee surgery back in January, well, it was just good to get out and go anywhere, right? When you're housed up like that. So glad you're here this morning. All right, anybody else?
This is Temple's last Sunday before she goes off for a while.
Temple, are you fixing the snowbird on us? Okay, all right, so this is your last Sunday. Well, we maybe you should be wishing us a good winter, right? Yeah, well, as the older I get, the more I think I'd like to go. So anyways, we do wish you a safe trip and a good winter, okay? What else? Billy, you able to lay down now and sleep like a regular lady again, as I understand, is that right? Yeah. All right. So, but your procedure went okay? Okay. Go back tomorrow. All right. All right. Anything else?
She's been hungry for a long time, and she's so weak and sick.
Miss Faye Donaldson? And what did you say? She was home and she was...
I mean, she's been hungry for a long time.
Yeah.
She's just so weak.
So weak right now. Okay. All right. Miss Faye Donaldson. Many of us know her. Anybody else? All right. Mike, would you say our opening prayer?
Father in heaven, we're thankful for today. We're thankful for the opportunity
Thank you, Mike. We will continue our study this morning on the miracles that Jesus performed. We are getting close to finishing them up. If you're probably not keeping count like I do, but we're on number 33. And so we'll turn to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. Lisa, is Brian up there? Hey, Brian, are you going to follow or do I got to stand still? All right, that's me. I like to walk. All right, because sometimes when you go back and look at that, well, there'll be 3 minutes and this thing's just empty here, you know, and probably don't think that's very good. So as long as he'll play along and follow along, well, I'll do my normal thing. Luke 17, we're going to start in verse 11, and I'll start reading there. A story that we know well. We know a lot of these miracles that Jesus done pretty well, don't we? And the next one we're going to get into is actually one of my most favorite Bible stories that there is, and we're going to talk about Lazarus. But let's start here about the 10 lepers. Luke 17, verse 11. Now on his way to Jerusalem, that'd be Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who stood with leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except for this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Now, twofold here, really. First of all, let's just go back. It says, now on his way to Jerusalem. So he was on his way to a larger city, but he was in between, right? And he was in between the borders of Samaria and Galilee. So not really sure exactly where he was. But he says as he was going into a village, and that's kind of Jesus' style, right? I mean, he didn't always perform his miracles on a large platform, did he? And he goes into the village, and 10 men who had leprosy. Why was all 10 of them in one group? They were outcasts. Why were they outcasts? They were what? Yeah, they were unclean. They were lepers. And so if you go back and study leprosy, and it was such a fallacy, really. Leprosy is not very contagious like they thought that it was, okay? It's not. There's still over, almost 200,000 cases in the world today of leprosy, but you live right in your home with your spouse, with your children. You don't get cast off into a village. It was just the way that it draws your skin, it affects your sight, you get weak. People were just scared. So really leprosy is not this, when I grew up as a kid, when I heard the story about leprosy, people had leprosy, it just scared me to death. I thought this was a terrible disease, and it is, but it can be healed even today, and it's long-term antibiotic treatments is how you cure leprosy today. But in this instance, as we know, probably they didn't have the best of medicine. Would you agree? The best of medicine had just walked into the village, hadn't he? Jesus, he had just got there. So these 10 men, but it's interesting here that what they said. And he said 10 men who had leprosy met him, and they stood at a distance. Why did they stand at a distance? Why didn't they walk right up to Jesus and beg him, "Heal me, help me"? Why didn't they do that? It's against the law. If you was unclean, you had leprosy, you couldn't get but within so many feet of somebody who didn't have leprosy. That's how scared, that's how they thought leprosy. I mean, and leprosy is contracted through fluids. So I mean, so to walk up to someone and talk to them, I mean, they wouldn't have got it, okay? That's just how scared people was. And, but you can imagine that, right? I mean, we'd feel the same way today. If there's no cure for something, I mean, you want that person at a distance, don't you? And that's the way that the lepers were treated during this time. But it says that they met him, they stood at a distance like they were supposed to, and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Interesting here, he said they asked for pity. What didn't they ask to be done? They didn't ask to be healed, did they? They asked for pity. Now, did they think Jesus could heal them? We're not sure at this point, are we? But at least they knew that was the best chance they had, wasn't it? So they asked for pity. They didn't ask to be healed. Let's read on. Verse 14. He says, when he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. Okay, different deal, wasn't it? I mean, he didn't call upon God. I mean, he didn't make no statement in this. He just said, "Okay, I agree. I do have pity. I do feel sorry for you. I do want you to be cleansed." And he told him, "Go to the high priest." Why did he send him to the high priest for? Why didn't he say, "Go home, go to town, go to Walmart"? Why did he want him to go to the priest? They had to be cleansed, that's right. But what was the significance of the priest here? Yes, that's exactly right. That was the law back then. That if you got healed, and sometimes you did. I mean, at least when I grew up thinking about leprosy, I just thought it was automatic death sentence, and it's not. It never was. Sometimes you can outlive leprosy. I mean, and you can. It will go away, even back then. So, in order to be declared cleansed, he had to go see the priest. And that's what Jesus said, and he knew that. So he was following the letter of the law there. He says, "Go," and he says, when you get there, he says, you're going to be cleansed. All right, so verse 15 says, one of them, one out of 10%, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Why is that important that he was a Samaritan? He really had it bad, didn't he? Not only did he have leprosy, but he was a Samaritan. He was an outcast, right? And Jesus even calls him a foreigner here in a minute. So he was a Samaritan. But was all 10 of them Samaritans? Did only Samaritans get leprosy? No, it'd be crazy. It'd be like us saying, only Americans get head colds. I mean that's nuts. So could possibly all 10 of these been Samaritans? Could have, right? But the probability, that's probably not good. Probably there was a mixture of nationalities in this, because when you got put into the leper colony, there wasn't no nationality problems then. You was all one, right? I mean, you had to survive within this colony of people that had this disease. So we're not sure, but he was making a point here that a Samaritan had come back and to thank him. In verse 17, Jesus asked, he says, "Were there not 10 of you all?" He said, "Where's the other 9 at? Are they not thankful? Why didn't they come back?" In verse 18, he says, "There was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner." And the foreigner being the Samaritan, right? Not a Jew. And then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." As you drill down into that verse a little bit, was the other 9 healed? It says they were, right? But they didn't have the faith that this one Samaritan did. They did not feel that need to come back and thank Jesus for what he had done. Now, once again, you think about it. I mean, if you had been given what was considered a death sentence back then, you had been sent off to a colony somewhere, and who knows how long this had been going on, weeks, months, years, I don't know, that these people hadn't seen their family, and they hadn't, and I mean, you're just total social outcast. I mean, you don't go to church, you don't go to town, you don't go to the market, you don't go see your family, and when your family comes, they sit at a distance, right? And it was a terrible situation. So, I don't know what happened the other night. It's easy for us to say, them rascals, they should have, no doubt they should have come back, right? And they should have thanked Jesus. And this is about faith for this one man, though, right? That he had this much faith, and that he did return to Jesus, and he did thank him and glorify God for being healed. 5 pages of notes on that. Didn't take long, did it? I'm moving right along. All right. That's really all of that one. Does anybody have any comments to make? Who do you think the 10 happiest people was on the planet that day? I mean, every one of these I think about when I do my lesson, I think, man, there was nobody for no reason any happier than these 10 guys that day, right? I mean, they were sitting right at the peak of the mountain of happiness, and I can only think how truly grateful that they were to God, even though they didn't return. I just have to believe that in my mind anyways, that they were that thankful. And I do know they were the 10 happiest people on the planet Earth on that particular day. And I would have been too, and so would you. All right. The next one, like I told you, it starts in John 11. It's the whole book. I mean, the whole chapter, not the whole book. John chapter 11, and it's about Lazarus. I never get old about reading about Lazarus. It's a great story. I love to teach it in junior worship. It's the coolest story, and it's a great story in the Bible. And how many of us don't know about Lazarus? At least something about it, right? Yeah, we all do, right? And I taught the book of John in here some years back, and I got to look in there, and it took me 3 weeks to teach this one chapter. So we're not going to do that today. We will speed up a little more through John chapter 11. But anyways, let's get started here. John chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick," critical really, he said, "was the same one who had poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair." Verse 3 says, "So the sisters sent word to Jesus, says, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.'" All right, we're going to take this in short spurts and stop. We're not going to read the whole thing and come back. All right, so first of all, they're on the way to Bethany, right? And Jesus gets word that someone that he loves is sick. Now, the very first thing I think of is in this time in life for someone to think that you had that personal relationship with Jesus, right? That he loved you. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? I mean, I just can't think of no finer feeling than to know that Jesus personally loved you and had that kind of personal relationship. In verse 4, he says, "When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified through it.'" Now, they had no idea, the disciples did, what Jesus was talking about here, did they? I mean, they was like, I'm sure they're thinking, okay, he's sick, nothing, he's not that critical, and that he's going to be okay. Verse 5 says, "Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus." Wow. What do you think about that? Jesus loved the sisters and Lazarus. That's a pretty good place to be in life at this time, isn't it? And no doubt that he had this kind of kinship, this friendship. One would think that he has spent time with them to have this kind of relationship, right? Stayed in their house. Because where's Jesus' house at? Once he started his ministry, well, where does Jesus live? Where was his house?
Wherever he was.
Wherever he was. Well, that's it. So he had no house, did he? One of this life's greatest things is to have at least a a place where we call our house, right? Whether you own it, whether you rent it, don't make no difference. Whether you lease it, that part's not a problem. But all of us, I think, sitting right here, I can safely say, has a home somewhere, right? Agreed? Yours is coming, right? Some of us under construction, maybe, but still have a house, right? So, I never had thought about that actually till last night. I was going back over this again, and I got into another commentary there, and it said Jesus didn't have a home. Now, it kind of struck me as odd they didn't have a house, right? We all have a home, what we call home base, right? And most of the time we hope that there's love in that house and there's safety in that house, there's food in your house, there's comfort, there's warmth, there's coolness, right? And Jesus had none of this. So I am confident that Jesus shared their home and felt like that this was at least a place he could go to get those things I just talked about. All right, verse 6 says, yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Now they had sent word to him that Lazarus, the one that he loved, was sick. Critical. Come help us. We know we love you. You love us. We know you're Jesus, the Christ, and we know if you can get here, that you can save him, right? What's Jesus do? And then he said to his disciples, he said, let's go back to Judea. Oh, no, we ain't going back there, are we? What does the Bible say was going on in Judea? And it says, but Rabbi, they said a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you want to go back there? You want to go back, Mike? I want to go somewhere where the friendlies are, do you? And Jesus decided to go back, whether they wanted to kill him or they wanted to stone him. And plus, he was going in the opposite direction of where Lazarus was at. Confusion for his disciples, you think? Absolutely. Don't you think so? I'd be confused. You know, Jesus is, he's the lover of your soul and he's healed people. And we are getting toward the end of Jesus' ministry here. His time when he was doing this. But as, this confusion and this was still plausible to his disciples because they still wasn't fully on board at this time, even this late in Jesus' ministry. And this is what he said. He says, he said, let's go back to Judea. Well, they want to kill us. Verse 8 says, they said, but Lord, he said a short while ago, he said they tried to stone you. That's what we just talked about. And he says, but yet you still want to go back there? Let's go to Bethany. They love you there, Let's go somewhere where it's safe. I would have felt the same way. Amen? Right? Everybody agree? Who wants to go back someplace that won't try to kill you? I mean, you're doing good work. You're healing people. People have been saved. So let's go somewhere where they want to hear it. At least that's the way I think about it. But Jesus didn't. Verse 9 says, and Jesus said, he said, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It's when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. What's that verse mean to you? Anybody going to take a shot at it? What's that mean to you? He says, you got 12 hours of daylight here. You can walk in the daylight and you can see. Now, he is answering back to them when they say, are you sure, Jesus, you want to go back to where they want to kill us? You want to go back there? And he says that. What's he talking about here? What's Jesus talking about? Is he truly talking about daylight and dark here? Yeah, that's right. He's talking about that he is the light, right? I mean, he is saying, when you walk in the darkness, when you walk into sin, that's when you stumble and fall. And when you walk with me, that's when you're in the daylight. That's when things is good. But still yet, I'm not sure how that answered the question back to them, other than the fact that you got to trust in me and what I'm saying. Most of us, if I had asked Wes, I'd say, Wes, are you sure you want to go back to Camargo because they just tried to kill me and you? I would expect a different answer, would you not? I would expect the West to say, yeah, but we'll go in the east side of town, slip down through Locust Street, and go out on the other side, and we'll get out to Winchester. But that's not what he said, was it? He just says, you got to trust in me, because I am the light, and the Christian way is the right way, so you're going to come and go with me. And they did. All right. Verse 11 says, he says, after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. Verse 12 says, his disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, stop, time out. He's saying, well, he's not sleeping, is he? They think Lazarus is asleep. They don't realize that he's dead. Jesus is talking about his physical death here. And he says, let's start on verse 12. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant through natural sleep, just what we just said. Verse 14 says, so then he told them plainly, he said, Lazarus is dead. The one I love, the one who loves me, the sisters that love me, the great relationship that I have, their brother, my friend, is dead, Lazarus. And he says, for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Now, let's read that again. Because, boy, that is a hammer load right there, okay? He says, for your sake, he says, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. What does that one sentence say? What's that say? He said, I'm glad that I wasn't there for your sake. Right? Shake your head a little bit, Mike. You agree? You agree? You know, I'm glad I wasn't there just for you. And there stands his disciples out there, and I'm sure they're going, what? What do you mean? What's this about us? Right? Why did you put this on us all of a sudden? It's for your sake. I did this for you. And we're going to find out here in just a minute why he said that. But he said after he's been dead, 2 days later, now we're going to go. All right. Verse 16, it says, then Thomas said to the rest of his disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. What's that say about Thomas right there? He's a believer, wasn't he? He says, if this is what Jesus wants, if this is the one he loved, then I'm ready to. Let's just all go with him, and maybe we'll just die right with Lazarus, right? That was his response. A different response. Verse 17 says, on his arrival, Jesus found Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, 4 days. Let's figure this out. 4 days, okay? They lived in the desert, very hot, right? There wasn't no way to prepare a body like we do today. So Lazarus had to be pretty decomposed, probably, right? And we'll get more into that in just a second. But it had been 4 days. Verse 18 says, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. Just like when we lose a loved one, friends and family, we gather together, don't we? Back in this day, there were several days of this that went on. We've talked about this before, up to a week, that they have this type of mourning and celebration. They even paid people back in the day, if you were wealthy enough, to have mourners come in and wail and cry and help mourn the death of their loved one. I don't see this here. I don't think. I'm not sure, but at this time, because they probably, they wasn't affluent enough and probably didn't have the money to do this. But anyways, in verse 20 it says, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Now, these two ladies are human, right? They loved Jesus, and Jesus loved them. They were good friends. No doubt they had spent a lot of time together. No doubt they had great friendship. Why do you think that one sister went and one stayed? Is it possible one sister's mad? Upset? Sure it is, isn't it? Absolutely. You know, think about, we're talking about us now, the way we would be thinking. And we would say, well, he didn't come, so my brother's dead, and he could have saved him. So could have been some ill will there, some ill feelings about that. In verse 21, Martha went, Mary stayed at home. In verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? It goes to show you right there truly what kind of great friendship they had, because how many others had walked up to Jesus and said something like that to him, right? If you'd been here, my brother would still be alive. So she was accusing him, right? If you had just come. We sent for you, and you didn't show up, and now Lazarus is dead. This is what Jesus says. He said, verse 22, he said, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. She's still believing, isn't she? She's still saying, I know that God can still deliver upon what you can do. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Now, do we believe that? Those of us who are Christians, those of us who have lost family and loved ones, if we believe they were Christians, do we believe that they will rise again one day? Sure we do, right? We believe in at the end of time that this will happen. It's what, our Great Commission that we believe in. But anyways, and Martha answered, he says, yes, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Just what I said we believe. In verse 25, Jesus said to her, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. He says, do you believe this? And we've heard that verse a lot in my whole time I grew up, right? And most of us did, right? and this is what she says. She says, yes, Lord. She said, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. Same thing we believe, right? So, here it is 2,000 years later, we still believe that same thing. In verse 28, and after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, or Jesus, who she's talking about. Jesus is here, she said, and he is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Now, very typical, right? And we still do that today. I mean, we go back to the resting place of our loved ones from time to time, and especially right after this has happened, right? And it's comforting usually to us to do this. So she got up, and all the people that was there, all of her friends and family and supporters had got up and followed her out because they thought she was going back to the tomb. Verse 32 says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's a sad scene, isn't it? She didn't come up to him and she didn't hug him. She just fell down and cried and said, if you had just been here, if you had just come, Lazarus, my brother, would be alive, the one that you love. Again, the second sister has done this. And this one is really pitiful, right? I mean, how many times, Mr. Amberg, have you felt at somebody's feet? None? What about you? Have you felt anybody's feet, felt this way? No? I mean, it's just not our custom today, is it? It's still in other countries, that's still a custom. Not a lot anymore, but this was a custom at that time. As we read in the Bible a lot about how people fell at the king's feet, at Jesus' feet, and they were pleading. And that's the way that they did that. That'd make me a little uncomfortable, wouldn't you, brother? If someone fell down at my feet and was begging and crying, but it was something that happened a lot back in this time during Jesus' ministry. Okay, she said, Lord, if you had just been there, my brother would not have died. Excuse me. I thought when the frost was coming that this would get better. Maybe this is part of life now. I don't know. All right, in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. What's that mean? Deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Have you ever been deeply moved and troubled? Do what? Yeah, he did. Right. He had the same feelings that you and I have, right? But all of us. You know, when we are deeply troubled. What's that mean when you're troubled? You ever been troubled, Mr. Wheels? Yeah. Well, what's it do to you, though? Yeah, it tears us up, doesn't it? It just does. When you're that troubled and you're that sad, it just does. And that's the same way that Jesus felt when he saw her and the group that was with her. And Jesus asked her, he says, where have you taken him? Where'd you lay him at? Where'd you bury him at? And she says, come see, Lord. And they replied. Verse 35, one of the most famous verses in the Bible, right? I was down at Queen Street, and one of the first Bible verses I ever learned in my life, what does it say? Verse 35, Jesus wept, right? What's that say to you once again? He was troubled, he was sad, and now he's crying, right? Show weakness? Is he showing weakness here as our leader? Compassion, absolutely. Jesus wept just like we wept when we lose our loved ones, right? Absolutely.
I think it says too that even though Jesus was the power, he also was human.
That's right. That's one of the hardest things we have a hard time with is to think that he was all human and all God, right? It's the hardest thing to wrap our minds around at this time. Jesus wept, verse 35. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? Everybody was convinced, right? Jesus was crying. In verse 37, it says, but some of them said, could not he have opened the eyes of the blind man who kept this man from dying? So in other words, they're saying, hey, could he have not saved him? They were questioning this at this point. Some of them, no doubt some in this group had already seen him heal someone who had been blind. And now they want to know, could they have not saved a man who had died? One of the hardest things to understand and to keep in mind during this time is they all forgot their cell phones, right? They didn't have no way to communicate. And you know, and I say that in jest and fun, but it's just true. I mean, you know, everything was done by word of mouth, right? You know, through the travels. And, you know, and we talked about this before. If I go over here and I whisper in your ear 5 words, and you whisper to her and to him, and it goes all the way around, and it gets back over here to Mr. Wheels, no telling what it's going to be, right? We've all done that before in school. And just think about how this travels like this, right? And how the word travels from town to town, from house to house. What you seen, what I saw. When I wasn't looking and I was looking away, and now I add to the story, right? You know, so, I mean, you got to realize the human factor in this and how this worked. All right. Verse 38 says, Jesus, once more, was deeply moved. He came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Now, that's not what we're accustomed to today, right? Was everybody buried like this back in the day? For the most part, they was. And the nicer the cave, well, the more affluent you was, and the more money that you had, okay? So it doesn't describe to us if he was in the affluent tomb nation or he was down in medium or low. It doesn't make no difference what we're talking about here. But he was, and that's the way that people were buried in a tomb, okay? a cave and a stone laid across the entrance. And I was in a cave, let's see, a week ago Saturday night, wasn't it? I'm thankful I don't got to be buried in a cave, okay? I don't like a cave. But went to a wedding in a cave, by the way. You ever been to a cave wedding? Something to behold. Most different thing I've ever done, okay? And but anyways, that's what them two young people wanted, or at least that's what the bride wanted, so it was all good with me. So anyway, verse 38 says, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb, and he says, verse 39, he says, take away the stone. Uh-oh. No, not me, right? How many days Lazarus been dead in the summer heat in the desert? 4, the Bible told us, right back earlier. Nope. Ain't taking no wrong. You know, Jesus, wait a minute. The flies, the smell, the stench, the look of this body. Nope. I ain't doing it. No, we don't want no part of this. We love you and we believe you. We think you're the master. But I'm just not sure we need to be doing that, rolling this stone away and exposing all this crowd to what's going to be seen behind that stone. And that's what Martha says. She says, but Lord, the sister of the dead man said, by this time there is a bad odor. 4 days, right? For he has been there for 4 days. Verse 40 says, and Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Now, he's gone back and questioned her, right? He's flew this back in her court. Ball's in your court now. You believe, Martha? Did you believe when you told me you did just a little while ago before we made it to the tomb? And if you did, here's what we need to do. So verse 41, it says, so they took away the stone, and then Jesus looked up and said, before we go any further, I would like to know what everybody looked like when they rolled that stone away, wouldn't you, Mike? I mean, I just, looking in there, and no doubt it was exactly like Martha said it was going to be, this scene, right? They rolled the stone away, and Jesus said, he says, in verse 41, he says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Very important verse, isn't it? Remember when Jesus said that I'd done this for the sake of you? Talking to his disciples, they let Lazarus die. They went back to Judea, went back to those people to hurl stones at him, maybe possibly try to kill him. But he says, I did this for your sake, and now he's delivering, isn't he? And he looks up into heaven and he's speaking to his Father. And he says, I knew, verse 42, he said, I knew that you always hear me. So he just consummates that, doesn't he? He says, I knew this. I don't have to really ask you. I knew this already. But he says, here's why I did this. He said, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, for the crowd that was there, right? He did it for them. And he said, I want you to know that you may believe, that they may believe that you sent me. Verse 43. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Try to be there with them, okay? Try to be standing there with this group of people. He's calling on a dead man that has been decaying in the desert heat for 4 days. Come on out there. You just been asleep, right? He says, just come on out. And can you imagine the looks and the feeling on people's faces? I can't. I can just see this group going, that ain't happening. Well, we love you, Lord, but I don't think that's going to happen, right? Dude's been gone for 4 days now. You may hit those warm ones and get them back up, just as soon as it's happened, but I'm just not sure you can do this 4 days later. And that's what he said. He says, in a loud voice, he says, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. Just like they know the story. His hands and his feet wrapped in strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. I can only imagine the expressions on those faces then. Can you? I don't know how many people was there. I have no earthly idea. But I'm going to assume that a fairly large crowd was there. And can you imagine that? I mean, I see this guy, and when you study this online, there's all kinds of pictures, and you know, linen. The people were wrapped in these strips, right? That's the way they buried people, and they put oil and perfume on them, the bodies, you know. And you know, can you imagine a guy walking out and all this linen, you know, all these strips hanging off of him? That's the picture that I got in my head, you know. And when he walked out, just like he told him to do. Now, how do you think that Mary and Martha felt at that time? Everybody's smiling. What are you smiling about? It had to be an awesome feeling, right? Brother been dead for 4 days. And think of this emotional roller coaster they had been on. You know, they sent for Jesus because they knew Jesus could save him, right? And he died. And then he calls upon their own faith, right? And he asked them again. He said, do you believe? And they said, we do. And he did. He delivered. And he did it for the sake of the people, so that they could know that Jesus had sent him. All right, we are done. And any questions or comments? Do you love the story of Lazarus as much as I do? I absolutely love the story, that chapter right there. It's a great story. Any comments? All right, thank you.